This is an AQA Psychology GCSE revision video for the paper 1 topic of perception with a specific focus on Gibson's direct theory. So Gibson believed that our perceptual abilities are innate, which means they're natural, we're born with them. They are already there from birth and in our nature, which is why his theory is often referred to as the direct theory, because perception comes directly from our environment. Gibson believed we do not need to fill in any gaps or make inferences based on experience and expectations. I'm just going to highlight that bit for you because that is actually what Gregory believes, which will be in a separate video, but it can already get you to think about the differences and similarities between those two theories. So direct perception is the idea that we perceive simply by using the information we receive through our senses, and perception therefore happens directly. So Gibson's theory is therefore called the direct theory of perception. Gibson also believed that sensation and perception are the same thing. So that can be another bullet point of AO1 for you to learn. Sensation and perception are the same thing. He believes that our eyes are sophisticated enough that we get everything we need in our optic array. So all we need to perceive is in the world around us. And so our brains don't need to fill in any gaps, organise or interpret, because sensation is perception, according to Gibson. The information we receive from the environment is the information we perceive. Gibson also argued that the uses of an object are perceived directly. We don't need any past experience of it. We can just look at it and know the suitable things to use it for or do with it. So we make affordances. Now, an affordance is related to the characteristics or properties of an object, and that suggests how it can be used. So Gibson says this is something we perceive from sensation from looking at an object. We know how to use it. For example, by looking at a tree stump, we know that we could walk around it, we could stand on it, we could sit on it, or we could hear with a stick. There'd be loads of uses, and we perceive that directly from our environment without the need for past experience. One final AO1 point for Gibson's theory is he refers to a monocular depth cue known as motion parallax. He says monocular depth cues are vital to direct perception because, again, we perceive directly from our environment without past experience. So motion parallax is a cue that helps us with perceiving the speed of movement. And again, it's something we're born with. We don't base this on experience. For example, we're moving along in a train. The objects that are closer to us seem to move much quicker than objects in the distance. So it's kind of demonstrated by this image here where you can see these objects will be closer to us, they're very blurry, whereas those hills or those mountains in the background tend to move much slower because they are further away from us. And so we make sense of this because of our understanding of movement, again, something we perceive directly from our environment. So to recap Gibson's theory, some key points to learn if given a 9-mark or a description question on Gibson. The AO1 comments are: he believes sensation and perception are the same thing. Sensation equals perception, perception equals sensation. He believes that the ability to perceive is innate, it's natural, we're born with it, it comes direct from the environment. He also used the visual cliff experiment to show perception was innate, and that is where he put young children on something that looked like it was a cliff to young children, and he showed that the children would not crawl to the edge of the cliff because they could perceive the depth, they could perceive that it was high and that they would fall. So that supports his theory. He believes our optic array is sophisticated, that we don't need to make inferences or fill in gaps based on experience because what we see is enough. So our optic array is enough, and it's called direct perception because we perceive directly from our senses. So that is a recap, some basic AO1 points to learn about Gibson, and we are now going to move on to evaluate Gibson's theory. So on the screen there are 3 evaluation points. This is an opportunity to pause the video and think about which ones are strengths and which ones are weaknesses of Gibson's theory, and in 5 seconds I'll go through the answers. Okay, so if Gibson argues that we are born with the ability to perceive the world around us, it doesn't explain how we can make perceptual errors or be fooled by visual illusions. That is definitely a weakness of Gibson's theory in that it's a partial explanation. Gibson's theory and the use of motion parallax proved useful to pilots in World War II. Well, that is its strength. That is a practical application. And Gibson's theory has research evidence to support it from Gibson and Walk's visual cliff experiment. That is also a strength because it shows what Gibson argued about perception being something we're born with, and he's shown that in young infants. So let's have a look at how we could develop each of these evaluation points into effective paragraphs. Okay, so a strength of Gibson's theory is that it is developed using research with pilots in the real world, so practical applications, real world applications. He worked for the US Army Air Force's aviation psychology program, and he was interested in the effect flying an aircraft had on visual perception. He found all the information a pilot required to land a plane was in the total pattern of light that reached the eye, and he used his findings to help develop aptitude tests, visual aptitude tests, for screening out pilot applicants. So this bit I'm highlighting is probably the most important bit here. You don't need to worry about all of this information, unless of course you're aiming for a grade 8 or 9. So you just need to know he used his findings to help develop aptitude tests for pilot applicants. And therefore his theory has real world relevance, and it can explain how we perceive the world around us in a daily occurrence of pilots especially. Another strength is that he did research with very young infants to provide support for his ideas. So the visual cliff experiment that I mentioned before, and you can just pop that into YouTube and have a quick watch of that video if you need to, but it supports for the key feature of Gibson's theory that we don't need to learn to perceive, we are born with it, because the infants that were tested were really young and they were reluctant to crawl off the edge of a visual cliff. So it was unlikely it was something that they could have learned because they were so young. This indicates that some perceptual abilities might actually be due to nature, which is what Gibson suggests, and therefore it supports his idea that perception is innate, it's something we are born with. However, a weakness is that he can't explain perceptual errors. Gibson cannot explain why visual illusions trick and fool the mind, because sensation and perception are the same thing according to Gibson, yet visual illusions show us that actually they're not. The information we receive can be misinterpreted, can be misperceived, and so we fall for those visual illusions. And so you can say Gibson's theory is limited because it cannot explain visual illusions. And you can give some examples of visual illusions that Gibson's theory does not explain. So that concludes the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.